Welcome to the start of the Cutter WhatIf NHL portion of the project. I talked about all the baseball stuff and then did football. Now that's going to hockey. Due to the fact that, of course, the hockey season and the basketball season pretty much was still going on while I was doing my football what ifs. So I couldn't really talk about it without stuff. Well, they're adding 2025 context and all that. So practically the first 16, 16, no. Yeah, the first 16 hockey episodes will be based off of teams that did not make the playoffs in the 2024-25 season. So I can't add any playoff context to anything. Nevertheless, the first stop on the NHL what if list is a team that I kind of cheer for in a sense as a backup team. And unfortunately, this team started off so fast in the 24-25 season and then they fell off a cliff. It's hard for me being in the Blueshirt Underground Facebook group and practically trying to be as positive as possible and people just ragging on you and all that. The Rangers fan base is not like any other ones. It can be cruel and all that. I mean, it's a little bit biased because I've been hanging out with those guys for 15 years and I've got to know the Rangers side of stories for 15 years and not many other teams. But anyway, let's talk about the New York Rangers. This is their what if is due to a President's Trophy campaign that ended terribly with a fluke playoff goal. This is the story of the 1991-92 New York Rangers. Hello out there, we're on the air. It's Cutter, what if NHL time? Tensions blow, the whistle blown, and the pucks go down the ice. Some teams just want to win the cup and do it with a smile. Hey, that is cool. Up on the River Nile. Oh, the good old hockey game. Who will come out on top? Will a team get through the cup by any means necessary? Oh, the good old hockey game. It's the best game you can name. And I'm have no shame. I will simulate those hockey games. Woo! So anyway, the New York Rangers were born in 1926. They were actually the second New York team in the NHL, which was weird because the previous season, the New York Americans were in, and they were a New York staple. But then Tex Rickard, the great promoter of many boxing and circus events, just happened to have a team. While watching a Montreal Boston playoff game, he had the bright idea that he should bring hockey to New York City, a second team to New York. So they called them the Texas Rangers. Not the Texas Rangers as in the baseball team, but Tex apostrophe S Rangers. And it was pretty impressive because he was once part of the Ranger thing. But anyhow, the Rangers came to prominence, bringing up some players from the Western Hockey League like Bill and Bun Cook, Frank Boucher, and a host of others like Buzz Patrick. The Rangers actually went out the gate fast. In their second season of NHL play in 27-28, they actually went to the Stanley Cup Finals against the Montreal Maroons because Montreal used to have two NHL teams at the same time. And the Rangers ended up winning that Stanley Cup series despite the fact that they had to find a replacement for Lauren Chabot, who took a bad shot off his face and he couldn't continue. They somehow got Lester Patrick, a legend in U.S. hockey, to be in net. And the Rangers won that game in overtime and ended up winning the series. The Rangers would then win in 1933 and 1940, both times against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And both times they won the Stanley Cup on an overtime goal in Toronto, no less. Can't remember who was the one in 1933, but I know 1940 was Brian Hextall. So yeah, the Rangers won the Stanley Cup in Toronto twice on overtime goals, two straight times. So anyway, the Rangers were a decent team and all that. They brought up people like Odd Heller, Davy Kerr, Yeah, Frank Boucher. Other names just get lost to me. Nevertheless, the Rangers were hoping that in 1940, after winning the Stanley Cup, they were going to do well. But they stupidly decided to burn the mortgage of Madison Square Garden in this Cup's bowl, and that kind of jinxed them and all that. Nevertheless, the Rangers did get to the Stanley Cup Finals 10 years later in 1950 after a tumultuous rest of the 40s, in which they actually once had a 6-win season in 1943-44, which was one of the worst in NHL history. But let's face facts, they only played 50 games back then instead of the 82 we know and love now. So anyway, the Rangers were really bad. They lost a lot of talent to World War II, more so than Toronto and a lot more than Montreal because Montreal had different rules on Quebecois in the war. But we're not going to get into that. Nevertheless, the Rangers in 1950 made the finals and had two golden chances in games 5 and 6. They won in games 5 and 6 to force a game 7 at the Detroit Olympia. The only problem was that the Rangers could only play one of those home games for the 1950 Stanley Cup Finals on Madison Square Garden ice because Madison Square Garden 3, not the one that we're accustomed to, had the circus every year and they couldn't turn the circus into a hockey rink. So basically, the series was either in Toronto or in Detroit. So game 7, Pete Bando scores in double overtime, and the Red Wings win the Stanley Cup. The Rangers unfortunately suffered massively and never made the Stanley Cup playoffs till 1971, one of the longest in NHL history. 21 years without making the playoffs. And this is the original 6 era where, you have a 4 out of 6 chance to make the playoffs. But they just weren't there. In the 60s, it was practically Toronto, Boston, Montreal, and Detroit. Toronto, Montreal, Detroit, and Chicago, with Boston and New York being they also Rams, if you will. The Rangers built up speed. They picked up some great players in the draft and also in the minor league system, like Rod Gilbert, Gentleman Jean Rattel, Vic Hatfield, Harry Howell, and of course my boy from Kitchener, Walkachuk. So anyway, the Rangers got back to the playoffs in 1971, beat the Leafs in the first round of the playoffs. Unfortunately, that would be marred by a Game 2 brawl, which saw Vic Hatfield decide to pick up Bernie Perron's mask when he was with the Leafs and throw it in the stands. What an asshole. I'm sorry, but that's how I feel. Nevertheless, the Rangers did make the finals in 1972, but had to face Bobby Orr and the Bruins and were taken out in 6 games. The Rangers would rebuild and had a fascinating team in 1975, but shockingly lost that series to the first round series to the New York Islanders in 11 seconds in overtime in the third and deciding game. The Islanders would use that momentum after that, going down 0-3 to the Penguins in the next round, but then winning the next 4 and almost doing the same thing to the Flyers. They were down 0-3 to the Flyers, but they won 3 straight but lost game 7. Nevertheless, the Rangers started big. They had this massive trade, trading away the heart and soul Brad Park to the Bruins for Phil Esposito. Trust me when I want to say that I don't want to bore you with Ranger stuff because, Jim and Eddie would be there. But yeah, nevertheless, the Rangers got to the finals in 1979, shocked a lot of people, taking care of the New York Islanders, who were supposed to be this ragtag great team. Rangers took on the Habs. They won game 1, forced Ken Dryden from the net for the first time in a playoff game in 8 years. And if it wasn't for Doug Riceborough, another former Kitchener Ranger, and his high shot that hurt Bunny LaRock in practice of putting Ken Dryden back in the net, who knows? Maybe with Bunny LaRock, the Rangers would have won the series. Now, the rules, of course, for the what if is always that I do like non-finals. Any team that made the finals and lost doesn't count. I want to see if teams could make playoff runs to make the finals. Nevertheless, the Rangers did okay, but in the 80s, they were up and down, up and down. 86, they shockingly lost the conference finals to the Habs because of one Patrick Waugh. Ranger fans have not forgotten or forgiven the name Patrick Waugh, especially with him being the Islanders' head coach as of this taping. So the Rangers were decent and all that. By 92, when I talk about the Rangers, they picked up a missing ingredient. After 92, they won the President's Trophy in that year. And then 93, they fell flat as basically Roger Nielsen was taken out by mutiny of Rangers by Mark Messier and co. 94, the Rangers won the Stanley Cup, getting over the hump against those pesky Islanders at Nassau Coliseum, taking care of Washington quite easily, having a massive 7-game conference final against the Devils, which almost ended badly for the Rangers, but thankfully it didn't, thanks to Stefan Matteau. And then the 7-game final against Vancouver, which the Canucks actually were down 3-1 and almost won it in 7, but the Rangers needed that cup, and 54 years later, the longest cup drought at that time was broken. Of course, we all know the Leafs have the drought now. Fuck that. Anywho, the Rangers in 95 would actually shut the door on Quebec, the Quebec Nordiques, and hockey in Quebec City, as that team would move to Colorado to become the Avalanche and somehow won the Cup in 96. The Rangers had a drought of 8 straight years without the playoffs, but they come through in the late 2000s and then the 2010s, getting to the Stanley Cup Finals in 2014, taking care of the Montreal Canadiens, and then seemingly supposed to take down those LA Kings, but they blew two goal leads in the first 2 games and ended up losing in 5. The Rangers have had some very massive playoff failures, such as 2015 Game 7 on home ice against Tampa in the conference finals to win the trip to the Stanley Cup against the Blackhawks. Not so fast. And then in 2024, getting to the finals against conference finals against the Panthers, and it looked like the Rangers were going to go to the Stanley Cup finals against the Oilers. Not so fast. So, anyways, that's a history lesson on the New York Rangers. So let's get to the what if. All right, so let's look at the 91-92 New York Rangers season, the 66th in team history. They won 50 games, lost 25, tied 5 for 105 points in 80 games when they played 80 games instead of 82. Highest point total in the league, which meant they won the President's Trophy for top scoring team. Anyhow, it was the first time since 1942 that the Rangers were the top team in the NHL. So, yeah, in the playoffs, they took care of the Devils, although it took 7 games, which was shocking because the Devils didn't have the full fledged stuff of Martin Brodeur. It was mostly Chris Terreri because Sean Burke was traded by the Devils to the Whalers. Anyhow, yeah, no, and they fell to the Penguins in 6 games in the division finals. This was actually Mark Messier's first year in the Rangers after holding out and forcing the Edmonton Oilers to trade him. So that was a massive trade that brought Bernie Nichols, Louis DeBrusque, and Stephen Rice, catch an error, to the Oilers. He put up 107 points, winning the Hart Trophy for MVP. Brian Leach put up 102 points to lead the league in defensive scoring and got the Norris Trophy for top defenseman. The Rangers never got shut out. They actually played preseason in Las Vegas against the Kings, and the Kings won the game 5-2. But it didn't matter. I mean, like, it was preseason. So anyway, the Rangers looked good. It was them, Washington, Pittsburgh, and New Jersey that made the playoffs. Pittsburgh had the advantage over the Devils by points. The Rangers were the top team in the conference. Now, if we used the 1-8 system, the Rangers would have faced the Flyers in the first round. Of course, the Flyers were still had those players that were not traded to Quebec in the Lindros deal. Like they still had Forsberg, Tocchet, no, not Tocchet, sorry, Chris Simon, Kerry Huffman, and Ron Hextall, among others. The others would have played Washington, Boston would have played Montreal, and New Jersey would have played Pittsburgh in the first round. Of course, it wasn't the 1-8 system, it was the system in the 80s that the top 4 teams in each division went on 1 versus 4, 2 versus 3. So the Rangers would face the Devils and the Capitals would play the Penguins. They had a pretty decent run and all that. In the division semis, they beat the Devils 2-1 in game 1, lost the next 2, then shut out the Devils in game 4, won a high scoring affair in game 5 back home 8-5, lost to the Devils 5-3, and then in game 7 on home ice for the first time ever, the Rangers were playing game 7 on home ice. The Rangers beat the Devils. And then the division finals saw them lose to the Penguins in game 1. Of course, game 2 will be marred by Adam Graves' slash, quote unquote slash, on Martin Lemieux that got Graves suspended for 5 games and Lemieux just basically crying like a little bitch. Sorry, that's just how I feel. Rangers won game 3 in overtime on a Chris King goal, and then Ron Francis just had to score from 50 feet away or some 50, 60 feet away over the shoulder of Mike Richter, and that forced him out of the net. John Van Biesbroek came in the net. The Penguins won that game in overtime and then won the next two. So yeah, so Messier 107 points, Leach 102 points, Mike Gardner when he was a Ranger 81 points. You see all those players and all that. Van Biesbroek and Richter basically doing their what they call tandem. 27 wins for Van Biesbroek, 23 for Richter. Richter was the goalie in the playoffs practically at 4-2. Unfortunately, after Richter gave up that 50-foot blast, Van Biesbroek came in and didn't do so well. So, yeah, the big trade was going to mess it. The 91 draft, they actually picked up Alex Kovalev from Dynamo Moscow. It was huge seeing a Russian be picked in the first round by any team. Kovalev would work out for the Rangers, especially in 94. Corey Hirsch was drafted in the 8th round from Kamloops. Corey Hirsch is a wonderful story. He does have a fantastic autobiography about his OCD and his hockey playing and all that. I even have that book autographed by Corey Hirsch. And it was um, Blueshirt Underground based because they asked a trivia question and I got it right. So I got that autograph thing. But anyway, let's take a look at what if the 92 Rangers actually faced the Bruins in the Stanley Cup semifinals. All right, so of course the sim matchup for hockey. What hockey does is gives you the start all those goalies who've been starters, and you choose your own goalie and all that. Baseball, you don't really choose your line. Well, you choose the starting pitcher for baseball, and for football, you choose your starting offense. But yeah, you can even do your starting scoring line, starting defensive line, and all that. So based off what I think, it would be Messier, Groniak, and Gardner for the Rangers up front with Patrick and Leach defense and Mike Richter in the net because he would have been the goalie that pushed them to the conference finals. Boston with Andy Moog, with Reggie Lemelin, the backup, Daniel Bethune, and Matt DeGeis. So here we go. Game 1 from New York because New York had more points. Game 1 sees the Rangers win 6-3. Great job. Rangers 3 goals in the first period. Adam Graves with 2. Sergei Manchinov with 1. Boston would make it 3-1 on a goal by Joey Juneau. Jan Eriksson scored to make it 4-1. Ray Bork made it 4-2 for the Bruins. And then late, Nemchinov scored his second of the night. Moog gets chased down the net. Gardner comes in to make it 6-2. And Nevin Markwart makes it 6-3. So that's stats and all that for all your players. All that. Chris Nyland only played 6 seconds alongside Lyndon Byers. Randy Miller played 1 minute 40 seconds for the Rangers. So that's your stuff. Stars of the game: Adam Graves, Sergei Ramchinov, and Joey Juneau. Game 2, the Bruins and Rangers go with the same format. And again, it's 6-3, but different goal scorer. Rangers 1 goal in the first period. Tony Amonte, when he was a New York Ranger before he got traded to the Hawks in 94, scored. Steve Hines, 57 Hines, as they call him because of Hines ketchup. 1-1. Mike Gardner made it 2-1. And then Tony Amonte, Mike Gardner, and Jan Eriksson. And again, Moog was replaced by Lemelin in the net. Glenn Wesley and Andy Brickley, the current Boston TV color commentator, made it 5-3. But the Rangers scored on a goal by Paul Broaden. Remember him? Well, anyway, Bob Carpenter and Gordon Murphy only played a minute 26. Same. There was no mention of one Chris Nyland. Ty Domi only played 5 seconds. But yeah, Moog again getting shelled. Gardner, Patrick, and Amonte, you're 3 stars. So we had to Bowtown. The Boston Moog still in the net, or you put Lemonlin. They're going to put Lemonlin in. The Bruins probably would put Lemonlin in the net. But it did not make the difference as the Rangers win 9-5. Working 9-5, baby. So the Rangers 3 goals of the first period: James Patrick, Mark Messier, and Tony Amonte. Bruins goals by Stephen Leach and Vladdy Rusicka. Tony Amonte scored to make it 4-2. Rosica made it 4-3. Ray Bork tied the game, and the Bruins were up 5-4 on the goal by Stephen Leach. But after Stefan Quintel got penalized for unsportsmanlike conduct, Mike Garner made it 5-5. Amande gets his hat trick. Amande scores, and then Berfune comes in the net for Reggie Levelin. Then Messier makes it 8-5, and Jan Eriksson makes it 9-5. So Randy Miller only played 57 seconds. They didn't really need him that much. Tony Monty scored not one, not two, but 4 goals. The Bruins used all those players. Matt Hervey, Sweeney, Hines, Poulin, Tomlinson, and Island trying to ruin them. So injuries. Groniak and Juno actually got hurt. I don't think there were no injuries. So Groniak and Juno are hurt, so they can't start. Omani, Messier, Gardner, the 3 stars. So yeah, Groniak and Juno got hurt. Okay. I know Flatty Rusica. So Flatty Rusica will play center. Agraniak out at left wing. So that would be So Jan Eriksson would start. They go back to Moog for game 4 because they have nothing to lose. Except that game, as the Rangers win 5-4. Garner scored, make it 1-0. Rusica made it 1-1. Graves made it 2-1. And then Ray Bork scored to tie the game at 2. Messier's on the power play after Stephen Leach got caught for high stickings. Made it 3-2. Leach did his job. Neely got called for charging, and then Ray Bork. Well, Leach scored 4-3. Bork scored 4-4, and then in double overtime, Sergei Nemchinov, after 23 minutes of 35 seconds of overtime, Nemchinov from Patrick and Messier makes it 5-4. They did their job and all that. Randy Miller only played 2 minutes. Doug Waite. Yeah, that's right. I forgot he was still on that team. 4 assists by James Patrick. The Bruins, 3 assists by Joey Juno. Chris Nyland only played 17 seconds and all that. Andy Brickley got injured. Richter beat Moog. Patrick Nemchinov and Richter, your 3 stars. So the Rangers would have beaten the Bruins, but that means that they would face the Chicago Blackhawks in the finals. That was so they would face the 91-92 Bruins, and Belfort. Sorry, Dirk Graham. Dirk Graham was Steve Larmer and Ronek. So yeah, so Rangers would play the Blackhawks in the final because what we do is we leave the other conference alone. So the Hawks would have qualified for the 92 finals. Belfort, Hasek, Waite, and Ray LeBlanc. Game 1 saw the Rangers win in overtime 6-5. They were up 4-0 after one period. Monte, Messier, Leach, and Nemchinov scored. And then after Nemchinov made it 5-0, and Belfort gets replaced by Ray LeBlanc. I'm actually shocked. But anyway, the Hawks would score 4 straight goals. Jeremy Roenick, Steve Thomas, Jeremy Roenick, Steve Thomas. And then Dirk Graham, with under a minute left, made it 5-5. And in overtime, at the 3:16 mark, Graves from Almonte and Sarella made it 6-5. The Blackhawks using Stu Grimson and Mike Peluso for not too many times, especially Noonan. 3 points by Roenick, 3 points by Larmer, 3 points by Nemchinov and Messier. Kosher for 7 seconds. Yeah, Ed Belfour was not the answer. 3 stars, Nemchinov, Roenick, and Messier. Game 2, Belfour back in the net. And it was the Rangers winning 5-1. Roenick scored, make it 1-0. And future Blackhawk Tony Monday tied it to make it 1. Messier scored in the second, then Nemchinov, Messier, and Garner. Ray LeBlanc would have come back in the net for Belfour. Nothing in the third period of note. Yeah, roller for 49. Ray LeBlanc did well in net and all that. So Garner, Messier, and Leach. So they'll switch off and go to Chicago, and it will be Dominic Hasek in the net instead of Belfort. And it didn't work. The Rangers win 5-0. Mark Messier with a hat trick, Amane and Leach scoring goals. So the Rangers win 5-0. A hat trick by Messier. Yeah. Ty Domi only played 4 seconds. Right in minute 59. Richter Hashik, Richter, Messier, and Leach are your 3 stars of the game. And game 4, the Blackhawks are almost dead, so they might as well put Belfour in the net. And it didn't work, as the New York Rangers win 7-3. They would have swept the Chicago Blackhawks like Pittsburgh did to them in real life. John Erickson scored. Then Adam Graves and Mike Gardner. Then Gardner scored. Messier made it 5-0. They put LeBlanc in the net. John O'Garnick scored for the Rangers. Goulet made it 6-1. Nemchinov. Well, Boogaboom got ejected for a cross-checking major. So Boogaboom was done. But Nemchinov scored to make it 7-1. Ronek scored twice, but it didn't matter, as the Rangers would win the game. Richter would do his job. Yeah, LeBlanc did much better than Belfort. I don't know what the fuck was wrong with Belfort. Messier, Gardner, Roenick, your 3 stars, and Messier would be named. I would say Messier would be named the Conn Smythe Trophy winner. So the Rangers would have swept the Bruins and swept the Blackhawks. They would have done what Pittsburgh did, because Pittsburgh swept Boston and Chicago. So the Rangers would have won the Stanley Cup. Their Stanley Cup drought would have only been 52 years, but they're still laughing over the Leaf fans. That's for sure. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. Adieu.